Gary Burghoff was an absolute delight. He brought that great charm to Radar. The teddy bear, the cuddliness, the naivete.
Few television series have managed to burrow as deeply into the heart of American culture as MASH, the groundbreaking military dramedy that ran for 11 extraordinary years and permanently changed what audiences expected from a television show, blending razor-sharp comedy with the kind of gut-wrenching emotional honesty that most networks at the time would never have dared to allow. And yet, despite the fact that millions of people grew up watching this show and consider it one of the greatest programs ever made, there are dozens of fascinating stories from behind the scenes that have never made it into the mainstream conversation. Secrets about how the show was created, who almost played the iconic roles, what really happened between cast members when the cameras stopped rolling, and which beloved star was so deeply disliked by his colleagues that one of them actually threw a chair at him. So let us start from the very beginning, because most people who love MASH do not realize that. The television series was adapted from a 1968 novel called MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors, written by a real Korean war surgeon named Dr. H. Richard Hornberger under the pen name Richard Hooker, a man who drew directly from his own experiences performing operations under wartime conditions to craft a story that mixed dark humor with the brutal reality of what military medicine actually looks like. And that novel's success eventually caught the attention of Hollywood, where a screenplay and then a major motion picture followed before the property finally landed on television. And the pilot script for that television series was written by Larry Gelbart, an accomplished screenwriter who had actually relocated to London specifically to escape the relentless pressures of the Hollywood entertainment machine. And yet, when the opportunity to write the MASH pilot came knocking, Gelbart simply could not turn it down. And what is remarkable is that he wrote the entire pilot script in just 2 days, a pace that might suggest carelessness but instead produced something so sharp and so tonally perfect that the network paid him $25,000 for it. And when that pilot aired on September 17, 1972, it launched one of the most celebrated series in television history, and the casting of that series involved some fascinating near-misses that most fans have never heard about, because McLean Stevenson, who eventually became beloved as Colonel Henry Blake, had actually hoped to be cast as Hawkeye Pierce, the lead surgeon and moral center of the show, but that role ultimately went to Alan Alda, who would go on to define the character so completely that it became impossible to imagine anyone else in the part. And comedian Robert Klein was offered the role of Trapper John McIntyre but turned it down, which opened the door for Wayne Rogers to step into the role. Though Rogers made the unusual decision to never sign a formal contract with the production, giving him the freedom to walk away at any moment, a situation that created an underlying tension on set and which ultimately allowed him to leave the series after just 3 seasons without any legal complications. And then there is the fascinating story of Maxwell Klinger, the cross-dressing corporal played by Jamie Farr, a character who was originally supposed to appear in exactly 1 episode and nothing more, because the initial concept for Klinger was inspired by a story comedian Lenny Bruce used to tell about being discharged from the Navy after claiming to have homosexual tendencies, and the writers wanted to use that premise for a one-off joke. But the network was uncomfortable with the idea of portraying a gay character on primetime television in that era. So they reimagined Klinger as a straight man who wore women's clothing purely as a strategy to convince military authorities he was mentally unfit for service. And what nobody expected was that Jamie Farr's performance would be so charming and so layered that audiences immediately fell in love with the character, turning a throwaway joke into one of the most memorable figures in the entire series. And both Alda and Farr brought something genuinely rare to their performances, which was actual military experience. Because Alda had served in the Army Reserve and understood from personal knowledge the specific rhythms and pressures of military life, while Farr had served in the Army before pursuing his acting career and brought that authentic understanding of military culture to every scene he appeared in. And one of the most interesting behind-the-scenes battles in the show's early history involved the laugh track, because both Larry Gelbart and executive producer Gene Reynolds were strongly opposed to using canned laughter on a show that was trying to balance genuine comedy with the serious emotional weight of wartime drama, arguing that a laugh track would undermine everything they were trying to accomplish. But CBS insisted on it because laugh tracks were standard practice for 30-minute sitcoms at the time, and the compromise they reached was that the laugh track would never be used during operating room scenes where the tone demanded silence and gravity. And over the course of the series, the laugh track was used less and less frequently until it was dropped entirely by the 11th season. And when MASH aired in the United Kingdom on the BBC, the laugh track was removed completely, allowing British audiences to experience the show as the drama-comedy hybrid it truly was, and the show attracted an impressive roster of guest stars over its run, including Ron Howard, Leslie Nielsen, and Patrick Swayze, each of whom appeared before reaching the full heights of their fame. And the production team also wove personal details into the fabric of the show in ways that most viewers never noticed, such as Mike Farrell having B.J. Honeycutt's daughter named after his own real-life daughter Erin, and Harry Morgan's character Colonel Potter being shown a photograph of his wife that was actually a picture of Morgan's real spouse. And the writing team faced a very specific kind of challenge throughout the show's run, which was that cast members frequently complained about their scripts and requested changes. And the writers eventually devised a brilliantly uncomfortable solution by rewriting scenes on 2 separate occasions that required the actors to wear heavy winter parkas while filming outdoors on the Malibu ranch set during the height of summer when temperatures were climbing between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and after sweating through layers of thick cold-weather gear under a blazing sun. The cast members found that their enthusiasm for lodging script complaints cooled considerably, and eagle-eyed fans have also spotted a number of fascinating anachronisms scattered throughout the series, including an episode in which Radar is shown reading the 10th issue of Captain Savage and his Battlefield Rangers, a comic book that was not actually published until January 1969, more than 15 years after the Korean War ended, and another episode in which a chocolate bar clearly displays a UPC barcode, a technology that was not introduced until 1974, 2 decades after the period in which the show was set. And one of the most remarkable facts about MASH is simply that the show lasted far longer than the actual conflict it depicted, because the Korean War itself ran for just 3 years, 1 month and 2 days, while MASH aired for 11 full seasons from 1972 to 1983. And rather than treating this as an awkward inconsistency, the creative team embraced it as a freedom that allowed them to explore the psychological and moral dimensions of war in ways that the strict timeline of the actual conflict never would have permitted. And Alan Alda's contributions to the show extended far beyond his performance as Hawkeye Pierce, because he also co-wrote and directed a remarkable 31 episodes including the series finale, making him the first person in television history to win Emmy Awards in all 3 major creative categories of acting, directing, and writing for the same show. A triple achievement that has never been matched, and the series finale itself, titled Goodbye, Farewell and Amen, aired on February 28, 1983, and became the single most watched television episode in American history, a record it still holds to this day, drawing an audience that represented 77% of the entire United States population at the time, which meant that more people tuned in to watch the MASH finale than watched the Super Bowl that same year. And the advertising rates reflected that extraordinary demand, with 30-second commercial spots during the finale selling for $450,000 compared to the $30,000 a typical episode would have commanded, and despite inspiring 3 spin-offs, none of which came close to matching the original's impact, MASH left behind a legacy that extended even into the physical world, because in the second-to-last episode the characters buried a time capsule on the Fox Ranch set. And just 2 months after filming was completed, the land was sold, and during construction work a worker accidentally unearthed that very time capsule, reaching out to Alan Alda, who advised him simply to keep it, though Alda later admitted with some amusement that the construction worker did not seem particularly impressed by the discovery. And now we arrive at the story that was promised at the beginning, because Gary Burghoff, the actor who played Radar O'Reilly, was apparently not always such a delight to his colleagues, because Wayne Rogers reportedly lost his temper with Burghoff so severely during one on-set confrontation that he threw a chair at him, and McLean Stevenson described his relationship with Burghoff as a love-hate dynamic, openly admitting that they were both difficult for each other at different times, and Alan Alda himself reportedly experienced the most sustained friction with Burghoff, who felt consistently undervalued and underappreciated within the production. A frustration that sometimes expressed itself in sharp exchanges and a coldness toward his co-stars that made the working environment genuinely uncomfortable. And yet, despite all of that tension, despite the chair-throwing and the personality clashes and the simmering resentments, the cast maintained enough professional discipline to keep delivering the performances that made MASH one of the most celebrated and emotionally resonant television series ever produced, which perhaps tells you something important about what great television actually requires, which is not a perfectly harmonious set but rather a group of talented and driven people who care enough about the work to show up and give everything they have, even when the relationships behind the scenes are anything but simple. And perhaps the most telling detail of all is that Radar's iconic teddy bear, the prop that became one of the most recognized symbols of the entire series, and which represented everything innocent and vulnerable about the character, was believed to be lost forever after the show ended, only to resurface years later at auction where it was purchased by Gary Burghoff himself, the very actor who had carried it through 11 seasons, which means that whatever tension existed between Burghoff and his colleagues, whatever resentments and clashes and thrown furniture marked those years of filming, the man still cared deeply enough about the work and about the character he had brought to life that when the chance came to reclaim the one object most associated with Radar O'Reilly, he took it, and that single fact somehow captures everything important about MASH, a show built by complicated people under enormous pressure that somehow managed to produce something lasting and genuinely moving, despite it all. So the next time you sit down to watch an episode of MASH, remember that beneath the laughter and the heartbreak and the unforgettable characters, there was a production that was itself a kind of battlefield, full of creative battles and personal friction and the daily pressure of making something extraordinary out of the chaos. And somehow, against all the odds, they did exactly that. 11 seasons, 251 episodes, and a finale that stopped an entire nation in its tracks, and reminded every single person watching that great storytelling has the power to make you feel things you did not know you were capable of feeling.